Good morning. Happy Tuesday. It's breaking the rain. Figured I would take the opportunity maybe to throw down a little bit of knowledge. If you remember from my Ramblin while Amblin yesterday morning, I was talking about a video that Freeman made wanting to film inside of a juvenile court in, I think it was Orem, Utah. And he didn't understand a clip that he threw in of a judge asking a lawyer for the DHS about the DHS regulations on filming and how it wasn't asking, or how could the lawyer say that it wasn't just an arbitrary kind of decision-making process, who to allow to film and who not to allow to film, etc. And James didn't understand what the thrust of that question was, and some others didn't as well, so I'm going to try to explain it. There's a test in the law, and it's not only in First Amendment law, but it's void for vagueness. And otherwise valid law can be void if it relies on the interpretation of the people administrating the law, of the executive branch. A classic example of it, not in the First Amendment, is California's stop and ID statute, because yes, we used to have one. It was found to be void for vagueness because the stopped person who was required to ID had to ID to the satisfaction of the officer. He had to prove his identity to the satisfaction of the officer who was demanding the identity. And so that's vague. A reasonable person wouldn't be able to tell when they were and were not complying with the law. I mean, if you handed the officer your ID, would that be sufficient? Would that fulfill the requirements? Or is the officer requiring more? You don't know. A reasonable person can't know. So it's void. It's void for vagueness. If it doesn't tell you on the face of it exactly what is or isn't allowed, exactly what the requirements on you are, then it is theoretically could be found to be void for vagueness. So that's what the court was looking at. Apparently there are some times where people are allowed to film. They're allowed to film on the footpath. They're allowed to film at that park that's outside of the DHS port of entry. And how is a reasonable person looking at the law, looking at DHS policy, to know that it is against the regulations promulgated by the Department of Homeland Security to film from a park outside of the DHS port of entry if your camera picks up X, Y, or Z? How is a reasonable person going to know that? So that's what the court was asking. Because it's arbitrary. Your camera may have caught X, Y, or Z. We get to stop you now. We get to seize your equipment. We get to delete your photos now. Because your camera captured X, Y, and Z. So it doesn't apply, for example, to a regulation about not filming in a courthouse, period. That's not arbitrary. That's not something that's left to the discretion of the people enforcing the law. They don't get to make a determination, you can film in here, absolutely, but if you accidentally capture a defendant, we get to seize your camera and delete the footage. Well, the defendants aren't walking around with big signs that say, "Hey, I'm a defendant." So you can't know. A reasonable person, your average Joe, couldn't know when he was or wasn't violating that policy, violating that rule. But that's not what the rule says. The rule says that their policy is to allow filming except in certain areas, and those areas are clearly delineated. So that's probably not void for vagueness. And requiring people to get a permit to film in a courtroom is also not void for vagueness, because at the end of the day, the court is going to set strict requirements on what is or isn't allowed. And because the court is setting the requirements, it's not going to be vague. A reasonable person would know what is and isn't allowed. It's not allowed unless you get a permit, or unless you get permission from the court. And if you get permission from the court, that's going to come with other regulations, other requirements attached, like you can't show defendants' faces or whatever in the courtroom. They're probably not just going to allow a member of the media to film in the galleys and the walkways and things like that. Media would probably be interested in a specific hearing, because media is actually out to gather actual news, not to create the content, but to gather the content. And because they'd most likely be interested in a trial, they would most likely be setting up in a courtroom, wanting to hear the ongoing trial, to record it. And the court might put regulations on, you can't film witnesses, you can't film jurors, you can't film the defendant, etc., etc. Your camera can only be here, if at all, and it has to be focused on this spot, blah, blah, blah. You can only use the court's internal mics for pickup. Everybody wonders about that one, but there's a good reason for that one. If you're only using the court's internal mics for pickup, they're wired to allow the judge to silence his mic if he's conferencing at the bench. They're wired to allow the attorneys to silence them if they're talking to their client. And it's going to prevent a lot of pickup of the protected information that's protected by the attorney-client privilege or the duty of confidentiality. So anyway, I hope that helps. The clip that Freeman played, he didn't understand, which is why it was so jarring in seeing it in that context. It had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on at the courthouse, because again, the void for vagueness doctrine doesn't apply in that particular situation, because it wasn't void for vagueness. It was very, very specific. You cannot film in here. That's not void for vagueness. I mean, it might be unreasonable, and I understand that the court was using the word unreasonable in that clip, but what the court was going after was void for vagueness. Or at least that's a first-year family law attorney's perspective on it. Do with it what you will. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching. I hope the gentleman who goes by the screen name Ted Nugent has had plenty of time to finish his morning poop. He gets pretty upset with me if I don't give him. I only gave him 4 minutes and 44 seconds. He likes to watch this while he poops. I guess I really get his pooper flowing. But I'm trying to give him enough time to cut one off. So, thanks for watching. Have a great morning.